Yo, what's up squad? Welcome on into the channel. My name is Kyle Meshna and I am a landscape photographer and filmmaker based here in San Francisco, California. Today we are looking at a few ways that we can get razor sharp photos in Lightroom specifically. Let's get into it. All right, so let's hop into Lightroom and check things out. First things first is going to be the detail section in Lightroom, which is probably the most common way to do sharpening. It's probably the one that you're most familiar with. So right off the bat, we know that we can increase the amount of sharpening that we have. And this will globally impact the sharpening of the photo across everything. One issue with doing too much sharpening from the global sharpening section is that if we zoom in here, we can see here that it creates a little bit of a sandpaper type effect to our photo if we get really in here on the details, and that kind of just looks gross. So the best way that we can fix this is by using the masking slider. So if we mask this out, we'll start to see that it only impacts part of the image. And the way that we can decide exactly what part of the image we are selecting and masking out, we can hold the Alt or Option key on your keyboard as we're dragging this. And we'll see here that it's now only affecting the parts that are white in the image. So for instance, if we only want to sharpen just the edges of these buildings, we can go ahead and slide that right there. And that looks pretty good. If we click this before and after, we'll see that it's done a pretty good job of sharpening our photo. By the way, if you have not done so already, all of the photos that I'm editing for this tutorial are edited with my Lightroom preset pack. You can go ahead and download that in the description below. And there's also a Lightroom editing tool belt, which allows you to one click and do a lot of the things that we're doing here. Highly recommend it for improving your overall workflow. Link is in the bio. So with something like the global sharpening and the masking for that global sharpening, that will help for urban photos or photos where there are some very clear defined edges. However, there might be some instances where you don't have some clearly defined edges, and there's some better tools for that. One of those is with texture and the other is with clarity. With texture, this adds some detail to the finer parts of the image. So for example, if we zoom in here a little bit, not quite that far, if we zoom in here to about 100%, you'll see that we have a few fine detailed edges here, and texture is really good at clearing up and isolating some of those fine details, for example. So if we look at zero texture versus a lot of texture, we'll see that this starts to define the edges of some of these fog waves here. Clarity, on the other hand, is a little bit more of a broad brush. Greg Benz has a great video on the differences between those. I'll link those up here or down in the description below. But suffice it to say that the main difference between texture and clarity is that texture is for more of those fine details and clarity is for more of those larger details. And it also impacts the tones of your image a little bit more. So there are instances in which you do want to affect the tones a little bit more, and this would actually be a good example. If we look at here a little bit, we actually do want to define the edges, the larger edges of these fog waves a little bit more. So if we add some clarity, we'll see that the contrast and the difference between some of these waves gets a little bit more defined. However, you can see that we start to overdo it here and we get some haloing. Do not abuse the clarity slider. This is very important. Do not abuse the clarity slider. So what if we only wanted to selectively apply something like texture and clarity? Well, we can absolutely do that. That's one of the great things about texture and clarity is if we, for example, use the gradient filter, we can create a gradient, say, that just affects this part. If you click O on your keyboard, it will bring up this mask that shows you what parts of the image it's affecting. So we only really want to be kind of defining this part of the image here. So we're gonna go ahead and only impact that part with this gradient filter. So let's go ahead and add some texture. And again, that's gonna define some of the smaller edges of these fog waves. And we could also add some clarity as well to add a little bit of contrast to the edges of these waves here. And if we look at the before and after here, we can see the massive difference that this is doing. So this is a completely different type of sharpening that you're adding to the photo. We're not just defining those fine-toothed edges, we are also applying it to the whole photo as well. And there you have it. There are 3 quick and easy ways to get razor sharp images, whether they have very defined edges or not very defined edges like this fog wave photo. Guys, if you did like this video, I would love it if you played thumb more with the like button. It really does help me out. I also make a lot of other videos like this, so definitely feel free to check one of those out and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, so now it's not going to be impacting